All right, guys, welcome back. We have Rachel Gaddis with us today. And Rachel, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah, great. I help women over 40 find ADHD-friendly careers.
Very good. And you do you help them with some transitioning there, right?
I do, yeah. A lot of times, we find ourselves wanting to change from one career to another career and not really sure exactly how to make that switch. Sometimes it's not necessarily a clear way to do it. And that's kind of my superpower is helping people figure out how to make that change. And I got a late diagnosis of ADHD myself. And so I understand how it can kind of rock your world a little bit and how it makes you look for places that are more friendly, right, to those ADHD superpowers and ADHD brains that we have, and how important it is to find the right fit in those very specific ways. So that's why I kind of picked this as a niche. I just love helping women in particular to switch careers. The crazier the switch, the better. I welcome the challenges, and yeah, ADHD brains. I love working with them because I am one.
Yeah. And something we didn't talk about before actually was I'm working with clients that are struggling with the structure at work sometimes, but also struggling
Mhm.
since, COVID and everything that happened, struggling with not having the structure of work. How do you work with that
Yeah.
with clients?
Yeah. There are so many ways to kind of figure out what exactly it is that you need and sort of put that in there. Um, like one thing that I'm doing lately is body doubling,
Mhm.
which is immensely helpful, I find. And it's so funny because all you're doing is getting on a call with somebody and both working at the same time. And yet I find that it really makes me, I really get a lot done on those body doubling calls. So there are just a lot of different tools and tricks that you can use for yourself to kind of satisfy your ADHD brain's needs for different things. It just depends on where exactly you're struggling. Um, and I know that didn't really entirely answer your question, but it's like our brains just need very specific uh, things. We have very specific itches to scratch, right? And then once we get that in place, we're kind of unleashed on everything, and it's magnificent.
Well,
But yeah, that's just one example.
and for my listening audience, I did not pay Rachel to say body doubling.
Is that one of
I
your
talk
things
about it
recently?
all the time.
It's huge for me. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
huge.
It makes a big, big, big difference. And there's so many ways to do it now. If you guys
There
are
are.
struggling working at home, you can make an appointment working with another person. And you can probably even do it in the office place now as well, because
Hmm.
it's very quiet, it's very contained. You can turn off your microphone, you can turn off your video even if you need to. But I mean, I've had clients that are um oh gosh, I'm forgetting at the moment what she did, but with dad.
Yeah.
I can't remember what she did, but almost all of my clients have tried body doubling. I absolutely love it, and it just is really, really so effective. I mean, I always tell the kind of funny story that I took my laptop out to my barn to clean out my barn, which is usually like an all day thing, and
Yeah.
done in like an hour because I had some other person there that was working as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I
So
was
helpful.
what was I doing? Folding laundry or sorting through part of my closet. And I just asked my husband to just sit in there with me
Mhm.
while I did it because it was taking me forever. And I'm telling you, I finished in like an hour and a half. It was crazy.
Well, and I mean, of course, we want to be, stay cognizant of what our partner wants to do. But so
Of
often, if I'm
course.
having
Yeah.
a day of that I'm struggling, I will say, "Would you mind if you just sit right over there?"
Yeah, yeah.
Like if
I
the
That's what
email's
I
done.
did. I was like, would it be okay if you? And he was like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so that's very good. It's just funny. Like I talk about body doubling all the time, and we did not mean for that to come up, but something that's been coming up with my clients here lately, especially those that work in the corporate world, is aligning with the values of the company. Can you tell us
Yeah.
how your work helps people with that?
Yeah. And this is a big, big deal for those of us with ADHD. And that was kind of a revelation to me as I started getting more into career transition coaching in particular for those of us with ADHD, because I had always kind of thought that this was just a me thing. The way that doing the right thing was so important to me at work that I would like go to the mat for it. And I would sometimes be the only one kind of saying, no, we have to do the right thing here. And people would be like, can't we just do the easy thing instead? And I'd be like, no, we have to do the right thing. This is what's right. Um, but that is an ADHD person quality. We have certain standards, certain moral standards, certain ethical standards, and we, by golly, we will abide by those standards no matter what. And we demand that from our, from our work environment, from our career, from our employer. So finding a career and an employer in a workplace that has values that match ours, that's crucial. One way that I do that is when I first start working with a client, I have them look at a list of example values. And I tell them, these are just examples. You don't have to use the exact ones on here. If you think of a value, it's a legit value. It doesn't have to be on the list. And then there's just a simple 2-column worksheet they fill out. On the one column on the left is a list where they can put their own values, like the top 5 or 10, whatever that they see on the list that they resonate with, right? And they put those in priority order from like most important to least important for their own personal values. And then on the right is the values that they seem to see are important to their employer on the right, in order of importance. And it's so illuminating to just see how much those match or how much they don't match, because sometimes it explains a lot about the conflict that they might be feeling at work, or the pain points, the friction.
Yeah.
But another thing I know that we were talking about is that you don't always know what your own values are, or you think you do, and you're not necessarily being honest with yourself about your values for whatever reason. Like maybe your real value is to do one thing, but what you have grown up believing your values should be was something else. Like you grew up thinking that you should be climbing the corporate ladder, but your actual value is not that at all. So you're in conflict about it, and you want to say it's one thing, but it's really the other. So that's where I think working with a coach can be super helpful. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a coach. I found this really helpful when I was working with a coach way, way before I even really knew what coaching was, because they listen so faithfully to what you're saying, and they will pull out little things that you're saying and go, oh, I heard you just use the word, this to describe that. I thought that was interesting. And you'll be like, did I use that word? Because you don't even listen to what you're saying. Or they'll say, oh, you really lit up when you were talking about, XYZ. And it seems to adhere to this other value that you were talking about earlier. How does that strike you? And it's just so interesting to have somebody listen that closely to you, because no one will listen to you as closely and faithfully as a coach. It is just a really fascinating experience. Anyway, working with a coach can be helpful for that reason.
I've never heard anybody explain it that way, but that has been my experience as a coach and as getting coached. They really can see like the whole picture that you're giving them. Not only that, but I feel like one of my superpowers as a coach is I will remember something somebody said like 6 months ago, and I can put it back in and go, okay, this is how this adds to the bigger picture. But another thing that we talked about with values is one way that I notice that our values, things are going against our values, is if you're getting annoyed or upset at things quite often, then it's probably not in alignment with your values. I had this experience where I was working with a person who just would irritate me and kind of rub me the wrong way. And this is not my normal experience in life. Like it's not that I'm just going around getting irritated by people, but I had this kind of close working relationship. And what I finally noticed is one of my values was personal responsibility. And our values that we want for ourselves, we expect others to have.
Exactly.
And this person did not have personal responsibility. Anytime anything went wrong, it was my fault. And actually, I'm like, It's not just about me getting irritated that you're blaming me. It's
Right.
actually against my value. And I own another business where I deal with like customers and then my clients
Yeah.
as well. Um, but I would never do that to them. I would never
Hmm.
make a mistake their fault, even if it is their fault. I'm going to
Right.
my personal responsibility. And so
Totally.
I
Totally.
I bring that story up just to say, like, if you are constantly having friction or irritation, it's probably because you can find a value there. It's actually a really good thing. Like, I think it's a great thing to
Mhm.
have personal responsibility. Gives you a lot of power
It
in your
is.
life, and you're going to show up as somebody that can be trusted. So
Hmm.
watch
Hmm.
for like where you're having your pain points. And I think pain points was even a word you
I think
mentioned.
that's such a great observation, and it is so true. When you are flaring up, somewhere, it is a value of yours is getting stepped on. And it's one that, depending on your level of response, it might be a really important value, like you said. Because,
Absolutely.
yeah, and it
Absolutely.
helps to know them. It helps to know what your values are a lot, because then you can look for places that don't step on them.
Yeah. And one thing that we talked about before is, and you kind of explained this with the worksheet, but sometimes values can seem very vague. Like, how can we make
Yeah.
knowing your values simple? I mean, of course, there is the worksheet, that tool, but I think one thing that we talked about before is you just get to decide, like, what kind of person do you want to be?
Yeah, you do. I mean, you decide what kind of person you are. You get to sort of decide what you've been doing. I mean, it's not a super scientific process, like you deciding which five are the most important to you. It's a gut feeling on your part. Nobody else gets to look inside your heart and say, no, that's not true for Mandy. It's actually this one over here. No, you're in charge of yourself. You're in charge of what you want to be, what kind of person you are, and what kind of person you want to be. So yeah, absolutely, it's up to you.
I did actually just did some work recently on like beliefs in yourself. And what I
Mm,
noticed, and I think it's very true for like values as well, what I noticed is the top beliefs I wanted to have about myself, I was already experiencing those things. I was already those things. And so oftentimes I think with our values as well, you're probably already those things. You just want to up level that, or in the case of like working with Rachel, you want to find a match. So
mhm.
one thing that this makes me think of is with some companies, could it be not so obvious what their values are? How do you deal with that?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, what you are looking for, first of all, you want to identify what your current employer's values are, and that should be easier since you're already there. When you're thinking about employers and careers, yeah, I mean, you're definitely going on more anecdotal evidence, people that you know who work there, or Glassdoor reviews, or writings about the companies. That's when you have to kind of do some research. And yeah, it can be hard to find out what their values are. And and really that's useful more when you get as far as like an interview or you're talking with them. Like it helps you kind of make sure you aren't uh, about to commit yourself to a situation where your values are going to get stepped on. Um, but broad strokes, you can certainly avoid some careers that don't seem like they're going to respect your values. Like, uh, to use an example of an industry I used to work in, consulting, and not to bash on consulting or anything because it's great, but if like things like being authentic and totally transparent and super honest with people is like your top three values, for example, you may not be very happy in consulting, where you have to kind of navigate between being uh, you know part of the team, being part of the other company, being like a salesperson, being like a customer service person. It's kind of like this mishmash of roles that you're switching between all the time. And it's like being super authentic at all times about what's happening with everybody across the board. It's not always possible when you're a consultant because you're having to kind of straddle several worlds at once. Um, and depending on your values, that can be a really terrible feeling. Um,
You mentioned before Glassdoor reviews. What does that mean?
Oh, I was just thinking of like, Glassdoor is a website where people talk about what it was like to work at a particular company, like from the employee's point of view. But
Mhm.
there are a lot of places where you can go to get direct employee feedback on what it was like to work at a company. Like you could just search the internet for like Reddit comments on an employer or Glassdoor comments on an employer or various forums, like depending on what type of work it is, you might know what subreddits to look in, or what other types of forums to look in, whether it was Facebook or something else. But uh, yeah, I mean, there are so many new things popping up all the time that I don't even know what they all are, but there's always a place to look where people are going to be talking about it.
And we don't want to leave out the entrepreneurs. I have even people
Absolutely.
that want
Absolutely.
to they want to switch from corporate to entrepreneurship, and it's mostly because the values are not matching. But
Hmm.
one thing I notice that is so helpful when I'm working with clients, and this is exactly getting down to their values, I'm just doing it in a different way. What is the most important thing to them? I tell them like I like to garden a lot. And so I'm like, those 5 gallon buckets. And they're like, yes. And I'm like, okay. So how many of those 5 gallon buckets can you carry? And it comes down to about four, because let's say these 5 gallon buckets are like full of water. Well, once you
Yeah,
start to carry them together, they tip, right? And so I get them down into 4 buckets, and that like sharpens their values very quickly, because what I'm saying is there's room for four things. And yes, lots of things go under this category,
sure, sure.
but once they know these are the most important things to me, this is what I value the most, these are my values.
Hmm.
That's a very simple way to put your values, right? What matters most. Then
Yeah,
when they are guiding their life towards that, they are so much happier. And that's outside of it's not completely outside of work, because one of those is going to be their work environment, right? I almost always,
yeah,
because
yeah.
they're feeding their families or doing their career.
But
But
but increasingly, isn't it about your overall life picture anyway? I mean, it's all of
way
these
more about
moves are
that.
about, yeah. It's well, you want to. And maybe this is true as we get older more too. I don't know, but increasingly you don't view your life as separated so much into these different neat compartments. It's everything kind of bleeds over, right? If you're working a job that stresses you out or has you working 60 or 70 hours a week or something, that taints your personal life. It sort of diminishes the pleasantness and enjoyability and even quantity of your personal life, right? And maybe affects your health and maybe affects all these other things. So you start thinking of it as like a holistic picture of like, well, in order to have an overall life that I want, where I have enough financial security, enough personal happiness, enough career happiness, I have to look at it overall so that everything kind of balances out.
Well, and it is just it's an underarching thing, right? All the buckets are going
Yeah.
under the underarching like satisfaction.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Can't even say the word satisfaction.
Well, that's why I like your picture of like you're carrying all these buckets because that's the way that it feels, right? You have to figure out what you want to carry. Yeah,
And you mentioned like later in life, your buckets change. They can change from
exactly.
month to month, and they're not set
Sure.
in stone. And they do cross over. Like when you're putting things into certain categories, if this, I like to talk about like cornerstone goals. Like usually
Mm,
it's like if you're not taking care of your health, you're not doing well at work. And
exactly.
so I agree, it does cross over quite often
That
around.
makes a lot of sense. I like that.
I wanted to talk definitely about how you're never too old, and tell us.
Oh,
So
yeah.
some people think that they're too old to, change careers, right? Tell us
Yeah.
about your grandfather, I believe it was.
Oh, yeah. The story I always think about when I hear people talking about their worry, right, that they're too old to change careers or really too old to do anything. I always remember my grandfather who learned how to play the violin when he was 75. And it surprised everyone, that he was doing that. But he just, started learning how to play it and he got quite good, actually. Um, but yeah, I always think about that and I think, how old are you again? It's like, oh, I'm 52. I'm like, oh, that's nothing. You still have plenty of time.
Yeah, there
So
was a story that I read because I would always say, and I think this is such an ADHD thing to say, and but I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And I was saying that
yes,
until like my
yes.
early 40s. But one thing that was so helpful was looking at people like Julia Child, who, those of you
Hmm.
there might know as like a famous cook. The Colonel Sanders, I don't think that was his actual name, was it? But he
I
didn't
don't know.
he didn't start his, chicken business until much later in life. There are all these
Yeah,
examples of people that either make a big change or don't start something until very much later in life. And so
yeah.
never too late. Even coaches. I've seen coaches that, in their
Oh,
60s
yeah.
and 70s just start coaching. As long as your mind is
Yeah, we
shut,
get to
you're
have
good.
second, third, fourth lives, guys. I mean, it's not, and the other thing I think people imply sometimes when they say I'm too old to change, to do something else, I think there's like an air of resignation to like, well, I'm just gonna do this and, kind of wait it out, right? Yeah, it's awful, but I'm just gonna kind of sit in the awfulness until I retire and, whatever. And like, you don't have to do that. I mean, you can if you want, no judgment, but you don't have to. It's not, you can get up and do something else. It's your life. You're in charge of it.
Yeah. And I think it comes from an era of, for people around my age, like our grandparents, where
Hmm.
my my grandparents on both sides were basically entrepreneurs in different agriculture businesses, oddly enough. But what other people did is they learned to go into a job and they were in that job for however many years until they retired, and then they collected their retirement. Um,
Yeah.
whereas I don't think that's a thing we need to do anymore. We can do whatever we want to do in our careers.
Yeah. And we have to change, right? Things are changing so quickly anyway that you really don't want to be too static anymore, I don't think.
So I like the way you explained your three things. Let's go ahead and
Oh,
talk about that.
yeah. So, what I like to do is focus on three things with my clients. I think of it as like a three-legged stool that's supporting the career transformation or career transition. And what we do is we focus on transferable skills and strengths, right? What skills and strengths can you take with you from career to career, or even what skills and strengths have you already been taking with you from career to career? That can often provide that through line, right? That you use to tell your story. So, transferable skills and strengths, narrative or story. What is that story of your career that we just talked about so that you can be in charge of the story? And then values, which, we already talked about as being very important. So, transferable skills and strengths, narrative, and values, all supporting as a three-legged stool that career transformation. And
And I
that way you
don't
have a strong platform to build on.
and I don't know if we said it after pressing record. So I apologize if we're repeating ourselves. I just think this is so important that Rachel said, which was if we don't have control of the narrative, the people that are interviewing us are just going to fill in the blank. Is that how you put it?
Yeah, exactly. Like what I say to my clients is, if you don't tell them the story of your career, they are going to make up a story about about how, why you changed jobs so many times, why you changed careers, and their story may not be accurate. It may not be, uh, it may not be in your favor. So you want to make up, not make up, but you want to tell them the story of how you got to be sitting here in front of them, right? It's so interesting, Mandy. I majored in this, which is totally unrelated to what I do now. Like you want to pull them in to your life a little bit, tell them the story of how you got to be here. They'll remember the story. People like stories. People engage with stories, they relate to them. And then after your interview has been long over, they'll still remember you. They'll remember the story that you told them.
Yeah.
That'll stick in their minds much more than some random Joe Schmo off the street who majored in computer science, worked in computer science, got another job in computer science. That's not a story. That's just
That's a
normal,
your science
right? Who
guy.
cares? That's boring. Yeah, nobody's going to remember that.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that because you're in like the career area, but that's true in our everyday life too. As somebody
Hmm.
that is very much like an introvert and I can stay very quiet in
Yeah.
social situations. Here I am talking to you on YouTube, and it sounds crazy that I'm saying this, but or on the podcast, but I am very much an introvert. And my experience my whole life has been I keep my mouth shut, and then people decide what my story is. And it
Yeah.
would get me in
Yeah.
trouble kind of a lot where people, because I didn't speak
Right.
up or tell them maybe how I felt about something or who I am about, then they just make it up. So I could see how in an interview situation, this would be 10 times as important that they're not looking at what do they call it as now? Is it still called a resume or are they calling it a CV? This is how long I've been out of
It's
this
still
world.
called a resume. Yeah,
Okay.
it's still called a resume. And this is making me think of something else because I don't want people to feel all paranoid, like I can't go out and not say anything because then people are thinking bad things about me. It's not like that. It's more like after you leave, after it's over, what do you want people to be thinking about you? What
Yeah.
do you want people to remember about you? And that's more along the lines of like personal brand, right? Whether it's in terms of your career or something else. What do you want people to like say about you once you've left the room, right? That's kind of what I tell people personal brand is.
And people remember stories and people like stories.
Yeah, people love
Uh,
stories. They respond to them. It's a universal language.
yeah. I'm actually getting my website redone under, have you ever heard of Donald Miller?
Oh, yeah, I think I
Yeah.
have. Yeah.
He's written a few books. He talks about StoryBrand. And
Yeah.
I'm working with a certified company that is going to do a StoryBrand
Awesome.
website for me. But why am I doing that? Because I want people to remember me. I want them to understand how I can help them. And it's the same with a company.
I can't wait to see your website redo. That's going to be so great.
I'm
Awesome.
excited. I'm very
Yeah.
excited. Okay, well, is there anything else that you feel like we haven't touched on that would be helpful to people?
I think we have covered everything.
Well, I think the next step would just be how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I've got my LinkedIn thing right here on my website under Rachel Gaddis or Rachel Gaddis Coaching. But also download my freebie. Go on my email list because I send out tips and offers and interesting info all the time. And it's a fun email list to be part of, and I'd love to have you on it. And you can do that by downloading my free career guide at Start Your Career, which is on my website. And that URL is going to be in the show notes, but it's rachelgaddiscoaching.com / start your career today.
All right, Rachel. Well, I love
Yeah.
talking to other ADHDers and I love your specific field. It's so needed and so helpful. I have so many people come to me in consultations that say, what is the best career for me? What should I do? And I think you're doing some really good work here as far as helping people, especially later in life, make that transition and especially know their strengths. I think that's so important.
Yeah, well, I love what you're doing as well. I feel like we have a mutual fan club going here, Mandy. And so it's been really fun talking with you today.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Take care.